Just a quick heads up that these are adults having adult conversations about things that take place on a show where the adults use a lot of adult language. All this to say there might be some salty language ahead, so please plan accordingly.
And though I believe that Ted Lasso will fail here and Richmond will suffer the embarrassment of relegation, I won't gloat when it happens, because I can't help but root for him.
What would Ted Lasso do? This is a question that we explore in each episode of this podcast. We take the lessons we learned from Ted Lasso and we apply them to the real world through the lens of leadership and positive psychology. My name is Dimple
And my name is Jeff Harry. And neither of us have ever recorded a podcast. But as Ted Lasso says, taking on a challenge is a lot like riding a horse. If you're comfortable while you're doing it, you're probably doing it wrong.
We hope you enjoy this episode as much as we enjoyed making it, and that it helps you find new ways to believe. How are you?
I'm doing okay.
Yeah.
So I don't know, for the last episode, I think I told you I was going to go on this 24-hour date.
Yeah,
it's going to go on this 24-hour date for this dateable podcast. So overall, how was the 24-hour date? And I was supposed to adopt a panda mentality.
That's right. Okay, give me a panda. Yep.
And being like, I'm curious, I'm playful, I'm fully present. So I did do that. And I did do that for, I believe, 23 and a half hours. But it just was too much. I was that exhausted.
That last half hour was just like
exhausting. Not to get into too many of the details, but we basically, first day we walked 12 and a half miles, talked about so much different stuff. The person is very fascinating, interesting, but not playful. And play is like one of my core values. And then the second day, I thought I did a really amazing thing. I had her go to my friend. I got my friend Reem to open up the inside of her restaurant for the first time since the pandemic. Like they opened it up as a test run.
Oh,
so
wow.
we were the first people to get to be inside. It was like a really special thing. I don't know if she even realized how special it was. And then we did that. And then the play thing that I did was like, we went to the Salvation Army and you could only spend $6.50 each. And we got to make costumes, right? And my costume was like a top hat and like this shawl. She just bought a sweater. Like that's all she bought, like a sweater that she's going to use every day. And then we went to my friend Matt Haney's.
Wait. What did she like? What was her response to your outfit?
She was just like, "Oh, that's what you're going to wear? Oh, okay." And then she was like, "Well, I'm going to pick something more utilitarian." And she got a sweater and a hat, as if she was like going shopping at Target. Right. And then from there, we went to Matt Haney's. We went to my friend Matt Haney's holiday party because he was running for assembly district. And there was chicken and waffles and all this good food and grits and stuff like that. And he bought us drinks. And I was like, this is amazing. But yes. But anyway, and then we just hung out and more people bought us drinks. And, it was all this stuff. I could go into the details, but I won't. But ultimately, at the end of the day, she was not playful, and I need that in a partner. So when we went to the podcast the next day,
just remind people the premise of this date.
The premise of this was it was a 24-hour date, 12 hours on Saturday, 12 hours on Sunday, 10 a.m. to 10 p.m. each day, and you only could spend $100. The premise also was do you gain more appreciation and possibly fall in love the longer you spend time with somebody. But I found as I spent more time with this person, I actually became more incompatible as I started to see more and more stuff that we just weren't aligned, right? So by the time I got on the podcast on Monday and they had interviewed her first and then they interviewed me, they were like, "What's your problem? She's amazing. She's smart. She's all these things. What's your deal?" And I was like, well, she's more results oriented. I'm more process oriented. And they were just like angry at that. What this reminds me of, and we kind of talked about this beforehand, is just, it was frustrating to me because I felt like I couldn't be honest and just be like, yo, these are the ways we like disagree. because that would just get too in the details. And I also didn't want to talk bad about another person, because it's not that that person's wrong. It's just like, they just don't align with me. But I also felt as if someone was telling a story about how I am feeling. And I'm like, why are you trying to like,
you're like, this is my story to tell about how I'm feeling. Yeah.
I'm just sharing how I'm feeling. And then they gave me suggestions on how to get better at dating. And they gave me suggestions like yes-anding and following your curiosity. And I'm like, dude, I do that. That's exactly what I did this is the only reason I got through this 24 hours. Like,
and I love how like, you're like the improv kind of person who like, that's your life anyway, is the yes and in curiosity. And they're giving you advice on how to do that.
Yeah. So I was like, oh my God, you're place-splaining me? Really? Is that what's happening? So, as you can see, I'm a little bitter, but like, I really was trying to be a panda the whole. I was really trying to be curious and present. I didn't pull out my phone. I didn't when she would be sharing stuff, I was like fully interested, and really, I even bought a care package because she had mentioned she liked popcorn. So I had a care package the next day. Like, I was on it. Right. So I was fully in it. But the fact that we were just not compatible was like, that's just a reality. And it was frustrating that I felt like I was wrong. I was being told I was wrong for feeling the way I'm feeling.
Yeah. Well, and I just want to say, like, all joking aside, like, that takes a lot of courage to just even engage in that. So I do want to acknowledge you for that, because I mean, I like the fact that you put yourself out there. I'm like so scared to do that. I can't imagine stepping out in that way with someone, and then to have somebody tell me that I'm doing it wrong, even though it's like talking about my lived experience. Like, so anyway, I am really impressed by your willingness to do that. So yeah, I'm sorry it didn't go so well, but good learning experience. So my thing was to be a goldfish, and I had many, many opportunities to practice this, which is fine. Like, I think it's a great concept. But what I found to be really interesting is, as I was kind of reflecting on it over the week, I really started kind of putting together the pieces that I think this idea of being a goldfish is super nuanced. Like, on the one hand, it feels like it's just about like, oh, just forget it and move on. But I think it's actually more about, or what I felt like it was about, was really about self-compassion and not really letting that inner critic take you down in the process, right? So I teach a class called MPEAK, which is Mindful Performance Enhancement, Awareness and Knowledge. And it's really like, it explores the cross section between mindfulness and performance. And so we talk about this a lot in the course. And, and it's this idea that like, if we're in any kind of a performance situation, we want to have that goldfish mentality, right? So that if you're an athlete and you mess up, like on the show, like where Sam, messed up, he was getting down on himself. And that's when Ted says that, just be a goldfish, right? And, the idea is we're not going to get in our head and then have that be the thing that gets in the way. Like, that's often what gets in the way anyway. And so one of the first examples for me that came up was even just like right after we recorded last week, there was an example that I had given about something, and I just like kept replaying it in my head. And I was like, oh my God, like that was just such a stupid example. Like, why did you say that? And, people are just going to be so bored of this. They're not going to want to listen. Da, da, da. And so you can find yourself like reliving the past and getting stuck in the past. And then you start thinking about the future that hasn't even happened yet, where you're like, and so for me, it was like, oh my gosh, nobody's going to want to listen to this. Like, it's terrible. Instead of, the goldfish piece is like, okay, I'm going to bring in the self-compassion. So in that moment, like, because I noticed that I'm in this spiral, I can stop myself and say, all right, you know what? It was one example. I'm my toughest critic anyway. Like, it probably wasn't as bad as I thought it was. And if it was, like, that's okay. Like, it happens. And I gave plenty of other great ones, Right. And so you can like bring yourself back into the present moment and not be stuck spinning in the past or the future. And so for me, like, that was really what came out of this idea of being a goldfish, was really just being present to where you're at and not getting stuck, in the past or the future. So
that sparked for me. I'm trying to look for the quote, but it was this professor that was talking about how you feel a feeling for about like 90 seconds. And then you have this choice of whether or not you want to continue to feel that feeling or not, and go down the negative spiral, or do you want to like change your mind at that point? It's funny how we keep doing it. It's like these 90-second intervals of, oh yeah, by the way, you're a horrible person. Hey, did I remind you you're also a horrible person? Hey, just in case you forgot, you're still horrible. And it's like we get this choice each time. But at the time, we're so good at getting into the negative spiral. We've done it for so many years. It's so hard to catch yourself, right?
Yeah. So let's jump into this week. This is one of my favorite episodes, I think, of this season for a lot of reasons. So today we're talking about season 1, episode 3, Trent Crimm, The Independent. This was written by Jason Sudeikis, Bill Lawrence, and Brendan Hunt, and directed by Tom Marshall. A lot of big themes. So definitely leadership, right? So many different styles of leadership, which we can dig into. Creating psychological safety was another one that I really tapped into. And then the other one that really came up for me was the power of kindness. And we talk about kindness in that realm of positive psychology, but there is really something very powerful about, and kind not being oh, you're a pushover or whatever, but kindness is really a superpower. And then obviously the bullying and the harassment, which was happening on 2 different levels, which I thought was interesting. So I don't know, what did you really notice?
Well, I mean, just from the beginning, I thought it was really interesting, right? Ted walks into Rebecca's office. Now I remember their names. So I'm very happy. So Ted walks into her office.
So am I.
She's angry that the story has not run yet. Yet he brings her the cookies and she sniffs the cookies. She's like, I need these cookies. It's amazing because she, both wants to destroy him, but she also was now beginning to need him in a way, which is really interesting. And I think that is what's happening with each and every character throughout it, is each of them are oh, this guy is a waste. And also, now it's it's digging in. So I first found that to be fascinating. It was okay, he's starting to make inroads.
I noticed that too, because there was 2 scenes, twice where he brought in the biscuits, and both time, it's just become such a normalized thing. And I was how many weeks have passed? But it's only been 2 weeks, because he says, in the scene with Beard, when they're talking about the strategy, he says, Crystal Palace kicked our booty last week. So that was, Crystal Palace was his first week. So it's only been 2 weeks, and he's already it's now become just the power of showing up and doing that. And it's just normalized now, where she's not even fighting him coming in anymore to give her the biscuit.
It's expected. Yet at the beginning, she was just I never have time for this. She still is now saying she doesn't have time for this, but she's making time, which is really interesting. Yeah. She's now just planned this out as part of it. So I thought that was really powerful. And then I loved when they started taking Nate the Great's ideas. This is what every organization should do. And I won't go too far into it, but my friend Reem,
go far.
my friend Reem, who opened up her Reem's restaurant. She has one in Oakland, but she opened one in San Francisco. And it was a really big deal. She's really awesome and everything, Palestinian bakery, but she opened it up right before the pandemic. So it was open for a week or 2 weeks. And then the pandemic shut it down. So, but she asked her staff, what ideas can we do in order to keep this thing going? And she came up with so many ideas, because it really did not matter whether you were line staff, waiter, whatever. She was I want all the ideas. And I feel that what Nate the Great was, right? And then later on, when Trent was you're getting it from the kit guy, you're getting it from this person. He's yeah, why not? I'll take ideas from anywhere, because I don't know this game. So I'm going to respect whoever knows this game, regardless of title. And I was ooh, that is a really great lesson.
Yeah, for sure. And, and I think that's that piece of leadership, right? So Ted's leadership style is just so emotionally intelligent, right? Like he can see like where people have the potential to excel, and he leads by inspiring and empowering people around him, right? And the thing with Nate was, I think it also, like, this was the scene for me in particular that when I started thinking about psychological safety. So like I also do a lot of work with this with clients, and so for people who don't know, psychological safety is this idea that we can show up in the workplace, say what we need to say, and trust that like we're not going to be punished for it or regarded badly for it. Like there's just a sense of safety that we have, that we can show up and be ourselves.
Yeah.
And I loved that you can see like in Nate and how he's carrying himself. Like when Ted asked about, do you have an idea? He's like, no, well, yes, no, and he's like, he's not sure what to do because nobody's ever asked him that. And then I love that they, so Ted's like, well, share it, like tell it, you're one of us. That's what he says.
Yeah.
Come on now, you're one of us. Go ahead and fire away. And Nate does give them the idea. And he says, whoa, well, no. And actually,
whoa, you're screaming at us.
Well, first Nate's like, well, he prefaces it with like, it's not even a great idea. It probably won't even work. And that's when Ted's like, I really have a hard time hearing people who don't believe in themselves. So I'm going to ask you again, like, do you believe that this idea will work? And then in that moment, Nate's like, well, yeah, I do. And that's when he's just like, why are you screaming at us?
Are you
like,
screaming?
And I love how Beard just jumps.
I love
right?
that.
Yeah, I love that too. And how Beard just jumps right in. He doesn't miss a beat. Like he's on the floor. And then the other part of that, so right, like to me, it was like already he's like creating that space where he's letting Nate know, like, look, but he also he set realistic expectations because after Nate walks him through the plan, he like hands it to Beard. He's like, all right, let's try it. And Nate goes, you're going to use my play? And he doesn't say, yes, we are going to use it. He says, we're going to try it out.
We're going to try it on. We're going to try
exactly,
it on.
Right. And like, and I love that because he's not promising like, hey, your idea is the shit and we're going to do it. And, but he's like, it's not an empty gesture,
Yep.
So, I really, I thought that was
also
really
I love about that is it's very experimental, right? It's very playful. It's very like, hey, we're just trying. I mean, we're trying everything right now. So we're open to this. And I love that idea of trying it on, right? I think they sometimes say that stuff in like Landmark, but it fits this idea of like, maybe I'll wear it out of the store. Maybe I won't. I don't know.
Yeah.
But they're having fun with it. And then when they actually put it out on the pitch and they see how much fun the team is having on it, again, the team is now trying it on and being like, does this fit us or not? And the only person that doesn't feel it fits is obviously the guy that's not getting the ball, Jamie, right? But then what I loved about that part, well, even before that, I love that part where then Ted challenges them all to run a race with him. And again, he's like, it's playful, but it's also competitive. And again, he's building rapport. It's only 2 weeks in, and he's already like, people are already getting a little bit more loose. Not that loose, but a little bit more loose.
Yeah. And what I liked about that running scene also is like, it's not Ted just being like, you guys have to do this. You guys, he's in there with them, I love that kind of leadership too. I once had a boss who, it didn't matter how high up he had gotten. Like I still remember like we were overseas on a trip and, he was part of like this official delegation and all this stuff. And they were supposed to take a plane out to this refugee camp where we were going to be interviewing, which was probably like a 6 or 7 hour drive from Bangkok. Wow. And then that, like the high level official pulled out and all this stuff. And so the flight got canceled and everything. And so he was like, can I bum a ride with you guys? Like in our van, like that. And he like came with us and he like spent time with the team. And it was not like, this is like someone who's like 3 levels above us. It's like, he's one of us, he understands. Yep. And he would always like step in to like, if somebody needed help with an interview or if they needed help with fingerprinting or whatever, like he was always willing to just like step in and actually be a part of it. And I remember talking to him about it once and he said, well, look, like, how can I lead the people around me if I don't understand, the work that they're doing? And, and I just, that always stuck with me,
Exactly.
And it's such a beautiful way to lead.
in my opinion, it's the only way to lead. And what I mean by that is like that leader doesn't always need to be in the trenches, but that leader needs to know what it's like to be in the trenches. And that leader needs to know that they are not above it, right? And there's so many leaders now that are like, I'll never do the other jobs ever again, even for like an hour. And it's just like, well, then you don't stop telling people what to do. Stop giving advice on a job you did 10 years ago, because it doesn't even work that way anymore. And you're still trying to give advice. So it's like,
And, to what you said about like your friend who wanted like ideas from everyone, right? Like, and how Ted wants ideas from anyone, right? He says, I'm on the prowl for new ideas, right? And there's something like, if you think about as a leader, that's so much pressure to put on yourself to be like, I have to know everything.
Yep.
And yet so many leaders do that, right? Like they're the only ones who know everything. They're the only ones who can do it. And it's like, well, why wouldn't you rely on everyone around you? Because that's like, in this case, like 30 additional brains as opposed to just one, or 30 additional like forms of creativity and ideas being expressed as opposed to just what's from my limited knowledge. And so it 100% makes a leader stronger, but it's interesting where people start to feel threatened around that.
Well, this is where it ties into, like white supremacist male patriarchal like culture of work, right? Where you're taught that you're supposed to be an individual. You're taught you're supposed to know everything. You're taught that because you're at the top, you should know all the answers. And then you think, if I ask a Nate the Great, right, and he does give me a good advice, well, then maybe he's better than me, so I'm not going to ask anybody, and I'm just going to do it all by myself, because that's what a leader is. And it's just like, that's the antiquated old version of leadership. I don't think that will survive in the future, in my opinion.
I don't think it will either. But let's contrast that then, so like Rebecca's style of leadership is just, it's toxic, right? So it's narcissistic. There's a lot of bullying, harassment,
He's constantly having to lie to her about where he is and what he's doing, like he's like sitting on the thing, like he's been there for a while, like, like he's lying. That's what happens in toxicity, right?
Yeah, for sure. For sure. Yeah. And like, you just can't show up as yourself, and then she just puts him down all the time. Like the things that she says to him. And I was going to say, when she says that he's equally proficient, when he says, I'm not a spy, Rebecca, she's like, you're equally, and he's, I'm just a director of football operations. She's like, yes, and equally proficient at both. And initially he's like, and then he's like, oh, and it's hurtful.
Well, even that, but also the fact that like he's lying and she knows he's lying. Like that's how toxic it is. And you've seen that so much in organizations where people are like, everyone knows everyone else is lying, but no one wants to point out the lie, or even the point. Like in Rebecca's case, she knows, and she points it out. And she's also like, you'll probably stab me in the back, Higgins. And really the whole time Higgins is just like, I just want to do good things. Like, like you're asking me to be as toxic and mean as you, and that's just not me.
It's not me. Yeah. Well, and that's interesting, right? Because like in the first episode, when she tells him like, oh, I'm taking this team down, he starts to have like this, I don't know if you noticed it, where he's like, like he keeps like, and he says that it feels like something's stuck right, like in his chest. And we'll see that come up over the course of the season, right? Because it's so uncomfortable for him to operate in that way.
So this brings up something else that I think sometimes we forget, right? The kindness aspect that we had talked about, it really does have a ripple effect. So think about it. Like, so Ted is so happy that she's going to stop them from running the story, right? Not knowing that she's the one who created the story in the first place, but whatever. So he asks her first, like, oh, can you do something? And Keeley's in the room. And then when she tells him later on, I was able to stop the story. And he's like, MVP. He tells Keeley, all of a sudden, Keeley, who a lot of people probably don't like, comes out of nowhere and starts being nice to her. So even without him telling her, hey, like, Keeley, you should go hang out with Rebecca, just because Ted was nice to Rebecca and then Rebecca supposedly was nice back, then Keeley was like, okay, now I'm going to reciprocate it. And the ripple effect starts happening. And then all of a sudden, Rebecca is getting compliments from like this model. Yeah. And you can tell like, wow, Rebecca hasn't had a friend in a really long time. And when was the last time she got complimented on like her body or complimented on all the things that she does? And that was fascinating, just seeing that whole domino effect.
Yeah, for sure. And the other thing about that, though, with the Keeley Rebecca thing is just, I love seeing, and I've read this so much too, a really solid female friendship being created where it's not about tearing each other down and things like that, even though Rebecca starts off this way. But what's interesting to what you were just saying is like Keeley is actually, she's intimidated by Rebecca. Right. Yeah. So she says that to Ted in the last episode around the panda lion thing, that she's so intimidated by her. And I think to your point, the kindness piece, I think it made like some of that wall come down to where she felt like maybe she could connect with her now because, you know, she wasn't as scared. Like if the person's going to be kind to me, then there's nothing to be scared of about them. Yeah. And she says that to you, I'm not going to be scared of you anymore. Right. I thought that was actually really lovely too. And their friendship is one of the things I love about this series as it progresses, to show women actually lifting each other up that way.
Yes, right. And that the story wasn't like their friendship in relation to a guy. It was just like their friendship, right?
Yeah.
But I find the other part that's really cool about it is also it's Keeley that probably gets Rebecca to bring down her guard. Ted does as well, but it's Keeley that has, because like probably Rebecca up until this time, because she's had to protect herself so much, she hasn't had anyone that she can like trust or confide in. And the fact that she even showed the picture to Keeley,
I know,
like,
I was surprised too.
It was like a really big thing. And then to get, so like that's even a risk as well, right? She could have also shooed Keeley out of, I didn't even think about this. She could have also shooed Keeley out of the room, but because Ted has hung out there before, now like Rebecca's willing to tolerate that person, even if it's for like 3 minutes, right? That wouldn't have happened before. So it's
I think you're right. Yeah. Yeah. Cause like she lets her sit down. She lets her put her feet up on the sofa.
Like she could have been like, then, get out of here and bring,
Yeah. Oh, that's funny. But going back to the kindness piece, like I also think to your point about the ripple effects, looking at like Ted and Trent Crimm, you know, and because from the minute like Trent Crimm has been like so rude to Ted in the press room, and like, and even when he shows up on the pitch that day, he's just like, "Hello, Ted Lasso from America." And like,
America.
And then when he confronts him about like, you're letting, you're trusting a major or a Premier League attack to a kit man, like he's so like confrontational and things like that. I mean, that's part of his job too, as a journalist, I guess. But Ted, like from the first minute, like he reaches out to shake his hand and he's just like, I'm really looking forward to spending time with you. And, and like that whole like thing, to the point of where by the end, like Trent is like bought in, he's just like, okay, like, this, and like at the end where Trent leaves the restaurant and Ted's just like, I just want to say I really enjoyed spending this time with you today. And he goes, you actually mean that, don't you?
You really believe that, don't you?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
And it's like, and it's like, but that was like his strategy, right? Like when you know what you do with tough cookies, you dip them in milk. So like
he literally dipped him in milk. And the other part, Trent Crimm, is it Crimm or Grimm? I guess it's Crimm.
Crimm.
But he reminds me of, remember Ratatouille, that food critic that was won over at the end, you know? And I think the part that I love about Trent is that they're playing completely different games. Trent is like, I'm ready for this adversarial battle between you. It's going to be the battle of the wits.
And he even says, let the battle commence.
Let the battle begin, right? When he's chopping but he thought the battle was the whole time. And Ted's playing the curious game. Like, he's not trying to win. That's the whole example. That's why he keeps emphasizing, like, I'm not, I don't really care about the successes and losses, right? The wins and the losses. So like, while Trent is going around like a Roomba looking for dirt, Ted's like, Ted's like, go ahead, like, look around. Like, you get to have access to everything. And then it's funny because even when they then go to the charity auction, the charity where like, Roy plays with the kids and blah, blah, blah. Trent's like, oh, what a coincidence that you planned this today. Again, thinking that Ted is playing that game, that Ted think this far ahead and be like, oh yeah, well, we got to set this up because this is how Trent thinks. And I think a lot of people do that all the time where they think you think how they think. Like that.
Exactly.
That I'm adversarial, so you'll be adversarial. And by the end, Trent has realized his game is not really fun, and he actually enjoys Ted's game more.
Yeah, yeah.
Like, I don't want to berate this guy. Like, that's one of the best lines. What is the line that he says? Although I believe Ted Lasso will fail, I won't gloat when it happens because I can't help but root for him. Like, woo, like.
That whole like montage at the end was beautiful. And the lines that really, in a business that celebrates ego, Ted reins us in. His coaching style is subtle. It never hits you over the head, slowly growing until you can no longer ignore its presence, whether that means allowing followers to become leaders. And then he goes on about the Indian food and stuff like that. But like, I mean, it sums it up perfectly, know?
Yeah. And then to think outside of Trent, that whole idea of like giving out the books, right? Phil Jackson used to do that with the Bulls as well as with the Lakers. He would give books out. Now, will most of those people read it? Probably not. But the ones that do, like, Jamie like tosses it, right? He's already shown he's not bought in. But the fact that Roy, even though he hates Ted, he's reading it to his niece, and then he's like,
awesome.
Yeah. He's like, this guy is having an effect on me. And you can see that Ted is having an effect on Roy from the beginning when Roy starts to mimic Ted. And it's like a really bad, like, I'm from Kansas, but it's digging into him. So from the beginning, you're like, okay, he's already having an effect, right? Because he's already, like, Roy's already pissed off. And when I thought this was one of my favorite parts is when Roy goes in to be like, are you going to do anything? And he goes, well, I've learned, what did he say about the bully? I'm trying to look for it now. But the whole idea of like, if the teacher tells the bully to stop bullying, then, they're going to continue.
They're going to do it more. Yeah.
So he's just like, well, you're not going to do anything. And he's just like, yeah. And then afterwards, he's like, that's the first domino. And it was like, oh,
I love that.
2 weeks in, recognizing the domino, but then also being very subtle about it as well.
Yeah. Not hitting them over the head.
No, because he could have told Roy to do that and then it wouldn't have worked out.
I want to pause on the books for a second because books are like a really big thing in this show. And what's been interesting, as like I said in the past, like I've dived deep into these Ted Lasso groups on Facebook. But like all these books have been like super analyzed, and it's really interesting because they've been very on point with things. And so there's a great article by Danica Ellis. It's called Overanalyzing Every Book on Ted Lasso to Predict Season 2. I won't talk about the predictions because I don't want to give away any spoilers, but I will say she did a pretty good job. But so Sam was given the book Ender's Game, and he's also at one point reading, like, I think a Harry Potter book. And so Danica makes this point about it's interesting that Sam keeps getting these books with authors who have transphobic and homophobic views. But she talks about, like, I had not read Ender's Game, but she talks about how it's potentially a message to Sam not to let himself be underestimated. Like Ender, he's been plucked from obscurity and has to make it in a new environment. This is also a story about imperialism and understanding the other, which is an appropriate pick since Sam just reminded Ted of that, of the U.S.
True.
And then Jamie gets The Beautiful and the Damned, which is about being obsessed with the past and status and wealth above everything else. It's a tale about mortality and just, like everything's like surface level kind of, right? And then Roy gets A Wrinkle in Time. Do you remember reading this as a kid?
I barely remember reading Wrinkle in Time, but I remember like the movies and stuff like that too.
Yeah. I feel like I read it in like 4th grade or something, but
yeah, I think we all,
I mean, yeah, like, but I don't remember it at all. But yeah, so we already kind of have a sense of what that's about because Trent Crimm explains that for us.
I love
but
that
then,
Trent Crimm comes in to explain that part for him too.
Yeah, and especially because like Roy has just gone off on Ted, and the other thing about that was like this idea of mind games, right? Like we'll hear that a lot over the season, like, and so I feel like somebody else said that in a previous episode, but Roy says it in this one. Like I'm just waiting. Like I'm done with the mind games and gifts, and and to your point, like going back to this idea that like this is the kind of leadership they've had up until now, right?
Yep.
And so they don't believe that somebody could really come in and want to empower them and help them become leaders. And I think that's when I was thinking about leadership as a theme, that was another element. So there was the emotionally intelligent leader, the toxic leader, and then there's the everyday leader. And that's what Ted is creating in this, like when he talks about not caring about the wins and losses, but really wanting to create the best version, like helping the players become the best versions of themselves on and off the field. And that's really everyday leadership, right? It's like being able to show up but then we see it play out as Roy also, like when he confronts Jamie in the locker room and it's just like, do you recognize the influence that you have on the people around you, right? And so how do you use that influence for good rather than the way that Jamie's been using it?
And Roy actually was nice to Jamie. Like he praised him. Like he could have berated him at that point, but he gave Jamie an opportunity to be like, hey, I'm coming to you as a leader. Now I want you to become a leader. And then Jamie's like, forget it. I'm going to do whatever I want. And that's when Roy's like, okay, I actually need to step up. Like, I think the other part there was something else. Oh, I think also going back to Trent for a moment, Trent, I think going to the soccer charity school thing probably thought, oh, this is where Ted is going to pretend that he's so amazing. But instead, Ted is like playing with the kids, like, he doesn't know, and he gets booed, and Trent's like, he's getting booed. Like, look at that, just like everyone else. But then when Roy like embarrasses Ted right in front of Trent, he's like, oh, okay. Like, and then
hungry?
Again, he realizes like, oh, you weren't actually doing this to impress me. Like you're letting me right in the middle of all of it. And then I think at that point, I think Trent's defensiveness goes down a little bit. And then probably, and I'm sure he doesn't do this usually, but Ted's like, hey, you want to get dinner? Like, are you hungry?
Yeah, are you hungry?
Like, so it's like slowly making progress on Trent, slowly making progress on Roy, slowly making progress on Rebecca. Like it's interesting in each and every. Yeah.
Did you ever play soccer as a kid?
I played all the way through high school.
So I played like when I was in elementary school, like on one of those like community teams or whatever. And this scene just makes me laugh so hard about the headers, right? So first of all, I think it's really cool that Roy gives positive feedback to every single person. Even like there's the little girl
that missed the ball.
He's like
okay, whatever.
And even when Ted goes through, he like compliments Ted. And then when Phoebe like kicks the ball in Ted's face, Roy comes over, he's like, good job, Phoebe. But I remember when I was playing soccer and it was, I was pretty young and like I was so scared of the ball hitting my head. And they used to make us do those drills, where they'd like, and so I'd always duck. And one time my dad happened to like come to practice and he was just like, hell no. And so he like came out and my coach was like my next door neighbor. So, like my dad knew him and stuff. And my dad just stood there and kept throwing the ball at my head because he was like, you can do this. You can do this. And it was just so like, I laugh at it now, but it was
so traumatizing
it was
at the time.
So traumatizing. And so that scene
it hurts when you're a young kid.
Yes, it does.
Like you're supposed to hit it right here, but most kids have it right here. And then you're like, ow.
Yeah. So but it always just makes me laugh now. So, but I love that.
You were getting re-traumatized as you were watching the headers of both.
Slightly, yeah.
Oh my goodness.
But I love that we see a different dimension of him too, though, right? Like that relationship that he has with his niece is just, it's so adorable. And the first time they're coming out onto the field, he's holding Phoebe's hand. He's got her with him.
Yeah.
As they're coming onto the field. And like, so you start to get a little bit of a like, oh, like this guy is not just like this gruff, whatever, like there's something there, And so, yeah, I love seeing that.
Something also interesting that I just like had a realization on is the power of follow through, the power of like following through on your word. When Ted goes to that guy's restaurant, or the guy, the driver's dad's
Ollie.
He's like, I say it to everybody. I don't actually mean it, or I don't actually believe anyone ever is going to do it. And it's fascinating that it actually comes through and follows through with it. I used to go to all these conferences. I would give out these ridiculous bow ties. I would give my business card.
Describe for the person because they can't see it.
So I have these I am wearing this Lego bow tie right now. And I used to, when I worked for the STEM organization, we had thousands of these Lego bow ties. So I'd bring them with me to conferences, but I also would say to people, hey, if you email me, I will give you one. And for every 10 business cards that I would give out to be like, hey, email me and I'll just mail you one for free, only one person would get back to me. Sometimes it was like 1 out of 20. Like, it was amazing how much people didn't believe it was actually real. Yeah. So when you actually do follow through, when you actually like say you're going to do something and actually remember, because I was like, who is that guy? Oh yeah, that guy's from when they picked him up from the airport from 2 weeks ago. He still remembers that guy, and also remembers his name. Like, come on, man. And then what was so interesting about like the whole hot food and like being like, give us whatever you want. It reminds me of, I don't know, that podcast where they eat like hot wings or whatever it is.
Oh, yeah.
But the eating of hot stuff disarms Trent. He can't even start to fight him and ask him all these questions because he's like, I just can't do this. Like, I just can't.
His question is like so destroyed.
Question just like gets destroyed. And then he's just like, I think we're done. Like the whole battle that I was supposed to have with you, I'm just not going to have this battle, So it's again, like all this. Yeah. And also now they were in it together because now they're both trying to eat that hot stuff and just try to tolerate it. And then Trent's like, I'm out. But that also is a shared experience between them two. So I found it interesting.
Yeah, no, I really like that. So I want to shift and talk about the other thing that I noticed was like and obviously like it was a big part of this episode was the bullying piece. So there was like the bullying that was happening in the locker room. And I feel like there's a part of it where like, there's like parallel tracks. Like there's all the stuff that happens in the locker room, not just bullying wise, but leadership wise. And then there's the parallel track of what's happening like with Ted and Rebecca and like the higher level, And I was thinking about that in terms of an organization too, because right, like what you see happening at your leadership level is what ends up coming down into, the workforce or whatever. So in this case, the team. And I mean, I don't know that they've seen Rebecca treat Higgins that way, but I feel like they have to, right? Because like we don't see it on screen, but like the fact that she says stuff to him in the hallways and stuff like that, people are around, right? And so like she as the leader has like been setting that tone. And now you've got Ted coming in and setting a completely different tone. And so you see the locker room start to split that way too, right? Because now you've got like Roy starting to like follow into that piece. And then you've got like Jamie, Isaac, and Colin, who are still just like harassing Nate. And really, and you hear him just pleading, like, please don't do this, until like Roy finally steps in and says something, which is him like stepping into that role as a leader in that space,
Oh, I love that. I didn't even, so this kind of ties in with what we were saying earlier, right? We find ourselves a lot of times when we're working with an organization and being like, hey, are you ready to do this work? Like, are you ready to create these psychologically safe workspaces? Because for that to happen, you have to be bought in as a leader. And there's so many times when people talk about leadership, right? Or talk about like, we're going to take some action. This happened a lot around Black Lives Matter last year, where so many organizations were like, we're going to do this thing. And then they did their black square and they sent out their email of how they're supportive. And they said they're going to do a lot of DEI stuff. And then they ended up either not doing it or ended up doing bare minimum so they could put that stamp of approval of like, look, we did something, right? And I think we really have to ask ourselves, in organizations, are we really willing to do the work, right? Are we, or do our actions actually represent our values? And if they're not, what are you doing to actually change that?
Yeah. And having the courage to step into that, right? So as we see like Ted's influence start to spread because he has the courage to stand up, even, and we've talked about this now, like letting things kind of roll off his back. And I don't think, I think again, it's very nuanced. It's not like he's a pushover and just like, he knows what's happening. He's watching what's happening. Like that, that scene from last time where like, Jamie's doing whatever he's doing. He sees it in the mirror as he's walking away, and so he sees what's happening and he knows that, but he also knows that he doesn't have to, again, this idea of being subtle about how you're doing it. He doesn't have to be in Jamie's face yelling at him like, hey, I saw you do that. But, he doesn't have to do that because he knows that what he's doing is going to have those ripple effects. And so as we start to see his influence start to spread at that leadership level, we see that happening in the locker room as well, where we start to see that bonding start happening amongst the team where they have each other's backs and ultimately they have his back. And I just think that it's really, really powerful. And I think it's a great example of how, in a lot of these toxic workplaces where it has been a culture of bullying and harassment and other things, it's not a lost cause, Like, you can change things. But to your point, like leaders have to be open and willing to do the hard work. And I agree. Like, I think on the DEIA front, I do a lot of work on this front too. And it is often very performative. And I'm not saying that, I think people don't know what they don't know. And that's part of the problem is like, they think they're doing the right thing, but they don't realize like, oh, this is not actually going to make a huge shift, or maybe I'm actually doing some more damage, So that's the other piece of it though, is like, you have to be willing to do that introspection first and then work with other people and that kind of thing. But yeah, I don't know. I just think that it's like, this show is so interesting on the leadership front. So interesting.
Yeah. I also think of just the small gestures of what you said earlier, right? Like, how many small gestures does Ted do to show that he has people's back, right? The countless gestures he does for Nate, right? The gesture he does for Sam before the game, the birthday before the game, and then after, right?
Yeah.
The gestures he's done for Roy, the gestures he's done for Keeley, heck, even the gestures he's done for Higgins and Rebecca. So he's constantly doing all these things and he's being very patient. Like, again, I can't imagine it's only 2 weeks in, right?
Yeah.
You wouldn't think someone would have this much effect after 2 weeks, but yeah, he's being really patient and also not like open to whatever is going to play out. Like, I don't think Ted is very fixated on like, he could never have planned for Nate to help them with the offense, but because he's curious, he opens up the opportunity for that, right? He probably could never plan that Sam would be shooting because, frankly, Sam is a fullback. Sam is on defense, so he shouldn't even be moving. I mean, according, when I would play soccer, he's really shouldn't even be meeting up there because then he puts the defense at a liability. But the fact that he's coming out of nowhere is such a weird, interesting way of like running that offense. So there's so many things that he's curious and open to trying. And that curiosity and the letting go of results, right? The playing, that gives him so much more freedom that a lot of people can't poke holes in his plan because he's like, oh, okay, fine. I'm going to move over here. I'm going to move over here. Like, he's not fixated on a certain outcome. Meanwhile, Rebecca is so fixated on the outcome. The outcome is like, I need to destroy this team.
Destroy this team.
How do I destroy the team? And none of it's working out her way because the article was supposed to come out. It didn't come out, right? They were supposed to be fighting. There's not fighting. Like, Trent Grimm was supposed to destroy Lasso. He didn't destroy him. She's like, like that fixated on one result. What I say this all the time, expectations are the thief of joy. She's constantly being robbed of joy or robbed of her win because she has such very specific outcomes that she needs to reach.
Yeah. And I think you're right. And like, I love, I say this to leaders all the time about curiosity being like the number one tool we have in our toolbox as leaders, because for this exact thing, that if you can adapt using curiosity, and you just have no idea like what you don't know what you don't know. And there's all these people around you who have had these life experiences and other things that have such different perspectives, and they can bring so much to this conversation. If you are so caught up in, like you said, like the result, or just like it's my way or the highway, like you're missing out on so much,
on everything, all the fun, all of the opportunities, all of that. Yeah. So woo, I agree. This is an amazing episode, especially because Trent writes that letter the same way like Ratatouille, where the guy's like writing it about like the rat. Like, I didn't think I'd be won over, but now I am won over.
It's entirely possible that that's like an Easter egg, because like they've done a lot of that where they bring in little, like they make references to things. So it's very possible. It's been a while since I've seen Ratatouille, but I know that they've referenced
that clip is so it has this similar. It has the same energy. It has such the same energy.
Okay. Yeah, because they've referenced Ratatouille in other parts of the show though. So I bet you're right. I bet you're right. What lesson are you taking this week to try to?
Oh, that's a good question. What lesson? I don't know yet. You go first because I have to think.
I know. I was like, I didn't really think about this one. I think I'm gonna go with kindness. I don't think I'm a mean person or anything like that, but I think we can all stand to be a little bit kinder. And so I think I'm gonna test that out this week in just every situation to see like how I can be just a little more kinder in each situation.
Ooh, I love that. I might have mentioned this before, but Elizabeth Gilbert would talk a lot about how when she walks into the room, she wants to be love in the room. And I was like, oh, I want to be play in the room. But like, yeah, that's so fascinating to think like, okay, when I walk into this room, I can be kindness in the room, and what actually happens because of this. I am going to commit to observing, do my actions represent my values? Like, do my actions actually represent what I actually believe? Or am I, and where I'm not doing that, I need to start calling myself out on it. Because if I'm going to call other people or organizations out and on a regular basis in like my TikTok videos and stuff like that, I should also be doing that for myself. Woo! That's going to be hard. It's going to be hard. My actions represent my values, or my actions represent, or even saying do my actions represent my words, and vice versa.
All right. Well, I can't wait to hear how that actually turns out, which we will talk about next week when we look at episode 4.
All right.
We're already at episode 4. Cool. Well, thanks as always. And I appreciate you.
Thanks so much. Thanks everyone for listening. See ya.
Thanks so much for listening to What Would Ted Lasso Do? If you got any nuggets of Ted Lasso wisdom from this episode, try them out in your life and let us know what happens at WWTLD Podcast on Twitter, Instagram, or at our website, www.tldpodcast.com, where you'll also find a full transcript of the show. We love hearing what other Ted Heads took away from the episode, or details or perspectives that we might have missed.
And if you do like the show, please subscribe and head on over to Apple Podcasts and leave us a 5-star rating. It all helps. We don't know exactly why, but it does. So in the spirit of believing in hope, believing in believe, please help us out.
And thank you to Podify and Sam Davidson for producing our show, to Kajal Dabalia for our visuals and graphics, and to Kenzie Slato for our theme song. And most of all, thank you to all of you for listening.
Ted Lasso could simply just be another show to binge watch, or if we challenge ourselves to consistently ask the question, what would Ted Lasso do? It could change the trajectory of your life. It has for us.
So join us again next time as we explore another episode and ask ourselves, what would Ted Lasso do?